Well, this headline is not a happy one, that's for sure. This is from Pink News, and it reads as follows. Almost half of LGBTQ plus youth feel unsafe at school, research finds. Around half of all LGBTQ plus young people feel unsafe in at least one school setting, according to a new report that also revealed the importance of affirmation for trans youth at home. I'm just going to interject very quickly to say, this is their goal. The right's goal is to terrify LGBT youth into staying in the closet for as long as possible. It is a detriment to conservatives that the more accepting of society, or the more accepting of trans people society gets, the more young people are going to feel comfortable coming out as trans younger, which is going to have a feeding effect of making those around them, their peers, other kids, exposed to trans people at a young age, inoculated to any potential disgust or fear responses that have been trained into them by the right and the right's propaganda, or could be programmed into them. And, basically having a more worldly experience growing up. The right recognizes that there being trans kids that feel safe in schools is bad, because if they come out and they feel safe and they can be open and they can be themselves, then that's going to be more kids who meet trans kids growing up, realize they're just normal people just like them, and they're not like evil or awful or ideologically driven or anything along those lines, and the vast majority of the right's propaganda just won't fly. Like, let's be clear. Do you really think that most... Like, do you think that a white guy... I know it's a meme, like the whole, white guy has a black best friend, he can't be racist. Not making that argument. But what I am saying is, if you have a white guy who's, like, politically neutral, just doesn't really think or talk about politics, and he has a black best friend, don't you think he's probably going to be harder to convince of a bunch of far-right propaganda meant to make you believe in racist shit? Harder to convince than a white guy who's never been friends with a black person before, who's never known a black person before? You understand the argument that I'm making, right? Exposure has been scientifically proven to reduce the likelihood of bigotry, and there is a more intense effect in that way the younger that one is exposed to those groups. On top of that, there's been quite a few studies that show it doesn't even just have to be a real-life relationship or friendship to have this effect. Watching television shows, playing games, and reading comics has also scientifically proven to, has been scientifically proven to make the vast majority of audiences more accepting and more connected to and exposed to the demographic in question. It actually has been shown to reduce bigotry. Anyway, a new report from LGBTQ plus civil rights nonprofit, the Human Rights Campaign, or HRC, reveals that 46.1% of young people in the U.S. feel unsafe at school, while trans and gender-expansive youth are even more likely to feel unsafe at school, with the figure rising to 54.9%. The report, released in partnership with the University of Connecticut, examines data gathered in 2022 from 13,000 LGBTQ plus youth across 13,000 LGBTQ plus youth across the U.S. aged 13 to 18. It delved into the experiences of LGBTQ plus youth at home and schools, as well as their mental health, sexual and gender identity development, and hopes, fears, and dreams for the future. The findings paint a picture of youth who are proud to be queer, but still face discrimination and live in fear. At school, LGBTQ plus youth feel most unsafe in bathrooms and locker rooms, places which have become a bitter battleground over transgender rights in particular over recent years. That's right. The only kids who are being threatened in regards to bathrooms and trans bathroom entry are the trans kids who feel the most unsafe, according to them. And these are children. We are literally talking 13 to 18-year-olds here, and you could, well, like, 13 to 17, sorry. So, like, we're talking kids, okay? We're talking actual kids. That's the main fucked up thing about the right's propaganda narrative they've been peddling lately that doesn't really make much sense, right? They argue they're trying to protect kids, and they're trying to defend them from this gender ideology. They claim the adults who are transgender are pedophiles and groomers, and they claim that the kids who are transgender are the victims. What is the line? Can they point to where the line is? Is it like an age thing? Like, if you're transgender and you're over the age of 18, does that make you a predator? But if you're under the age of 18, that makes you a groomed victim? Is that the logic? It is the logic, by the way. That is exactly what they think, but they're not going to be that outright open about it. Quite literally, can't have shit in red states if you're trans. Oh yeah, they are going after they're going after the ability just to have medical care in general. They're trying to give doctors and surgeons and other medical practitioners as much freedom to deny trans people service, no matter what the circumstance, as possible. It is perhaps unsurprising that schools are not always places of safety for LGBTQ+ young people, with Republican-controlled states across the U.S. ruthlessly attacking the rights of queer and trans students. This month alone has seen public schools in Florida's Orange County announce new guidance that means trans teachers will be misgendered and students will need parental consent for any deviation, quote-unquote, from their legal name. Yep, that's right. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but if you are in Orange County, Florida, if you go to school and you want to be called a name that is different from what is on your birth certificate, you have to get a signed permission slip from your parents. You can get in trouble, and other students and teachers and faculty and staff can get in trouble for referring to you by a nickname or a pseudonym or anything along those lines. If they call you your online username and some Karen hears it, they can push for charges. And that's all it takes, is just some Karen. That's what these laws are made for, to give the power to that, one or two Karens that are going to, blow their lid off over finding out their kid is referred to by a feminine-sounding username in a video game, and then, go to the school faculty to complain about their kid getting transed. Because heaven forbid that queer kids be able to feel safe at school when they can't be themselves at home. Oh, one of the core values of conservatism, as they've been pushing it lately, is parental rights, as they call it. So, a lot of lefties are in favor of something called child rights. It sounds a little silly on the surface when you think about it. Child rights, like what? Okay, maybe some parents joke about their kids being their dish slave or whatever, but they're not like a second-class citizen, kids, right? They're just a little dumb and they're growing up, and we've got to protect them. They do have less privileges, but it's for their own good. But then when you really look at the societal dynamics, going back even 100 years ago, you realize that the current state of parenting, particularly in conservative households, is basically the same as it has been going back to medieval times, but just shearing away some of the worst aspects of it. But the idea that a child is the property of their parent, morally, and that, morally, regardless of how bad of a parent that parent is, the child owes the parent something for existing. That is a core value of conservatism. They believe that they, as parents, should have utmost rights over what their kids get to do, especially rights over what their kids decide they want to do. They view the hierarchy of a conservative household, I've said this many times, goes the father, the mother, the children, and the dogs, and maybe the cat, and then the, barn animals, depending on the household, in that order descending. And that is considered to be the father, the husband, the man of the house's family. And then, of course, God above all that, right? That's what they say they believe, right? God, then the father, then the wife, then the kids, then the dog, then the cat, then the farm animals, right? You see this particular format very commonly where I grew up in Florida, where it's a lot more rural, where you just see a lot of families that are, it's a dad who's very clearly ex-military, usually an ex-Marine, And his wife, who, you know, they got married when they were like 19 out of wedlock, and they had a baby out of wedlock. They had like a marriage baby. They had to get married for. They're still together. You know, you hear the screaming from their house every other night because they're screaming and fighting because they got married when they were 19 and they're not happy together. But like, they come out the next day and they act like the happiest family ever. They also tend to be like the most judgmental. All of you guys who've lived in like a rural area know what I'm talking about. It's just very, very common. The patriarchal, like, you know, worldview is one in which the children are essentially slave property of their parents. And these parents, of course, these right-wing parents, believe that they should have full control over every bit of info that enters their child's mind. Any tips for people who live in a transphobic or gay-phobic or LGBT-phobic country? Get a gun. Affirmation of correct name and pronouns at home, vital for mental health of trans youth. The findings show that for trans and gender expansive youth, interesting term, I've not used this one before, or not used, I've not heard that term before, but I guess it's, you know, a good one. Gender expansive. Having their correct pronouns and chosen names affirmed at home is vital. Young people who experience this affirmation more frequently at home were significantly less likely to screen positive for depression and anxiety. Overall, the report found that 55% of LGBTQ+ youth are likely to have depression, rising to 60% among transgender and gender expansive young people specifically. I can believe that based on most of what you guys say, like on my Twitter and Discord and shit. It's a similar picture for anxiety, with 2/3, 63.5% of LGBTQ+ youth and 68.2% of trans and gender expansive youth screening positive for anxiety, respectively. For the purposes of the report, screening positive for depression is based on the PHQ-2, a widely used two-question screening tool which assessed the frequency over the prior 2 weeks of the respondent having quote-unquote little interest or pleasure in doing things, or quote-unquote feeling down, depressed, or hopeless. Screening positive for anxiety is based on the GAD-2, which assessed the frequency over the prior 2 weeks of the respondent feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge, not being able to stop or control worrying. I will say, very limited survey or study with it. I mean, 4 questions isn't like not enough. It's just like you'd think it would be something like 8 or 10, you know, like 12, something like that. You know, like something that would fit, like fill up a paper. Trans youth face greater risk of mental health problems than their cisgender peers. This is true. However, there has also been overwhelming and incontrovertible data that has shown time and time again that all of these mental health problems drop significantly and fall off significantly statistically. And I mean by like a lot, by like into the 70s and 80 percentile. Simply with the support and affirmation of one friend or family member in a trans youth's life. One friend or family member can have up to a 70% reduction on the rate of anxiety, suicidal ideation, and depression in trans youth. It's not an over-exaggeration either. It is an insane... It shouldn't surprise you, though. Imagine, like, having one person in your life supporting you, at least, contributing significantly to your mental health, going in a better direction. Who could have possibly thought that would be the result? The vast majority of young people are proud to be a part of the LGBTQ+ community. Now, here's the thing to remember. This is not an article that, right-wingers can try to twist into saying, look, the LGBT kids are actually miserable. See, they actually hate it. When in reality, remember, despite some worrying results, the HRC report also found that a vast majority, 90% of young people, are proud to be a part of the LGBTQ+ community. This was slightly higher, 92%, for transgender and gender-expansive youth. Still, pride didn't detract from their fears of what they may face in adult life. Around 2/3, 69.2% of LGBTQ+ youth, said they are afraid they will be discriminated against in their future career due to their LGBTQ+ identity. Quote, this report underscores the complex feelings held by LGBTQ+ youth around the country, said Shoshana K. Goldberg, Director of Public Education and Research at the Human Rights Campaign. While virtually all LGBTQ plus youth are out and proud, she said, many are still lacking the support and affirmation they need, leading them to experience depression and anxiety and to feel unsafe at school and fearful for their future. Looking at how the young people's emotional well-being improved when they felt safe and accepted, Goldberg said, "It is our responsibility to ensure that we lift up these young people and make sure they know they are valued, loved, and that they are not alone." I appreciate that message. Yeah, it's a good message. I like that. That's good. That's a good message. So, we've got to talk about this. I'm not saying that under normal circumstances, there would be a rate of near zero fear and, sadness and anxiety among LGBTQ youth in schools. I mean, there's always been homophobia. There's always been problems. There's always going to be social pressures. There's always going to be, like, a homophobic kid in the classroom that you can't really do much about other than, like, do your best with. But insofar as the systemic changes that have been made across red states as of late, particularly Florida, which is, where this... What kind of spurned this, right? It is very clear that the state has declared war on a class of people that includes children. But it's not just that that group includes children and those children are being caught as like a non-intentional consequence of the right's actions. The right is directly aiming these policies at these children. They know that they know about the studies. They lie about them all the time. They have to know about what the studies actually say to lie about them, right? You see conservatives lie about the contents of studies that actually say trans kids end up being way less likely to commit suicide and way happier when they get, gender-affirming care and, affirmation about their identity, etc. And the right's response to that is to do everything in their power to instill the opposite on those kids. Everything about their actions should suggest to you that they want these kids dead, that they want to, through policy, essentially exterminate a generation of trans kids via self-induced genocide, effectively. We know what the stats look like for trans youth that don't have access to affirmation and gender-affirming care. An insane amount of them attempt suicide. The right knows this more than anything. Where do we always hear the, 1250? What was the, what's the statistic? 40%? Is that the meme? The 40% one? Yeah, that's the number the Nazis like. Yeah, 41%. Yeah. You see Nazis and conservatives, like, banting around that 41% statistic a lot, and it is them basically gleefully reiterating the percentage of LGBT people who attempt or idealize suicide at some point in their lives. Now, to be clear, this is not an effective argument against, validating trans people. They're trying to make it seem as though being trans makes you suicidal. And so when the left provides, affirmation, and if medical practitioners provide medical transition, then they want you to believe that they think that the left is consigning these trans people to that 41%, when in reality what the right is doing is what creates that 41%, which should be obvious that they know that, because when they say 41%, they say it with a smile on their face and laughing, right? So at the end of the day, I think it's very clear that the right just wants trans people dead. And I think the kids know that now. And as unfortunate as that is for those kids, I would argue it's going to be way more unfortunate for the Republicans when those kids and their peers hit voting age. The Republican Party is on a timer. It is a dead party walking. I swear. Seriously, clip me. Clip me saying that. In like 10 years, I guarantee you the Republican Party is a shadow. A shred, a shadow, a whisper of what it is now. I guarantee it. I promise you.